Meanwhile, let's turn our attention for what can only be described as the head-to-head.
Head-to-head.
I'm really amazed with the level of production on this Saturday lecture show.
No expenses spared, James.
It's very clear that that's the case. Meanwhile, we are joined live in the studio by Stella Chedikedu, who's a former Labour aide, and also to Harrison Griffiths, political commentator and communications expert at the IEA. Welcome to you both. Thank you very much indeed for coming in to join us. So, the Whitehall blob. Rennie, perhaps you could explain the story, and then we'll get a little bit of a take on it.
So I think 42 senior people in Whitehall have sent Simon Case a letter complaining that decisions in politics and by politicians are being influenced by ideology, which he calls woke. I'll just call it ideology, which is infiltrating departments and affecting the decisions that are made.
So, Stella, maybe we could start with you. I mean, look, do we need to be concerned about Whitehall just being taken over by woke action?
I'm not really sure what that means, because I'm not really sure what... I haven't seen the letter. Obviously, this letter was meant to be for Simon Case. It wasn't made to be read by everyone publicly. I do not know what the decisions that they are saying are being influenced by ideology. Obviously, civil servants should not be ideological. They should act according to what the ministers tell them, according to what the people who have been voted in by the public tell them. They should not have their own ideology and they should not act on that. So I'm not really sure what it means by that. What I'm wondering is this a distraction tactic to talk about a woke mob taking over the civil service or whatever, so that we have someone to blame when the government doesn't manage to carry out the projects that they are supposed to be carrying out?
I think some of this, and an awful lot of this article seems to be taken up by gender, that seems to have overtaken our world. Somebody was concerned, agreed that gender-critical beliefs were protected under the Equality Act 2010, should be respected. Her reply was that the letter reportedly claims that the idea that an individual's gender identity is more important than their sex is now treated as undisputed fact. Is that woke, or is that just us being slightly more aware as to what the issues are?
Is this being taken as undisputed, as an undisputed fact? And how would that kind of discussion or debate, how would that influence government policy? That's what I want to know.
Because it's influencing the education department massively.
Okay. So is there a specific, are they referring to a specific policy where a minister said, oh, based on the fact that I have all of these civil servants working around me who believe one thing, I'm going to do this policy? This is what I'm wondering, because reading through the article, and again, I haven't seen the actual letter, but I've read some of the articles on this topic, it does seem that some of the problems are related to HR, so employees feeling like they cannot speak about something, or feeling like decisions are being taken about the way that they're actually working in the civil service, which is an HR issue.
It is an HR issue. Harrison, what do you make of this? Is Whitehall being taken over by a woke blob and mob?
I mean, I do like the framing of it, but I can't necessarily, engage too much in this idea that it's a bit of a conspiracy. I think for the most part it's not. It's just you think of the demographics of people who make up civil servants. Do
you just think then that this is a Daily Headcraft piece of sort of like red meat for a Saturday paper? Yeah,
broadly speaking, yes. But I don't. It's not to say it's a non-issue, because I don't think that's the case either. But if you just think of the demographics of people who make up civil servants, they're educated, they're mostly middle class, and those two things are very predictive of a certain worldview, which is broadly pro-immigration, pro the economic consensus we've had over the last 15 years, sort of left on the culture war, you could say. And so it kind of makes sense that civil servants are going to be like that. But what the thing, the government does have something to answer for here, because the Equality Act 2010, for various reasons, is not a great piece of legislation. And on this issue...
So who do we blame for that?
It's not that easy to say, but I think, the people involved in passing the Equality Act 2010 could probably, they would probably be the root of these problems.
There are lots of issues in sport and various other things with it, where you get almost perverse results from it.
Yeah, absolutely. But the guidance is all over the shop on this. What's protected, what's not, what's the government's official stance on gender and sex and whatever. Wherever you stand on that, it's about as clear as mud, and I can imagine it's not particularly easy to work for the government when you know, it's very unclear exactly what you are and aren't allowed to believe, what you are and aren't allowed to implement. You know, there is no clear direction on this or on much really from the government at the moment. So
and
it can't be
I think that's what's wanted, isn't it? I think teachers, doctors are crying out for clear guidance on this. And I mean, because I know that doctors are terrified to speak about things that they feel are absolutely awful that are going on, and they have science to back them up, but they still can't speak. So we need guidance from the top to help people speak.
You say you want guidance, but then what if that guidance was against what you believed was right? Because that's part of the problem here, isn't it? Which is sometimes we have to do things in our jobs that we don't necessarily agree with in terms of what we would do or what we think or how we would act.
Absolutely, and I think there is actually a problem with this, because the second you do issue clear guidance, one of the two sides gets angry. And that creates backlash that the government, you know, does not want to deal with particularly. I think really the solution is to get guidance out of it altogether.
Well, no,
I mean, to decentralise schooling and healthcare in a way that allows different people to speak in different ways.
No, because what we're dealing with here is the safeguarding of children.
Yeah.
So that has to be at the core of everything. And I don't care who's shouting from the winds. Let's use the science. Let's use the science. Let's use the systemic reviews. Like lots of countries.
You're assuming that science is fact.
I'm always very suspicious when people say the science.
Okay,
science is not a settled then. I mean, when climate change, when the climate change activists say that.
At the moment, there are very good data which actually could guide what we do. So let's use it.
I don't necessarily disagree.
We're not using it.
I don't necessarily disagree with you on that. But when it comes to, you know, the government issuing clear guidance, it seems to me that there are some seriously contentious issues here. And when the government steps in and says this is the answer, you're going to create a lot of problems.
You are going to create the problems, you see, because the thing is that you assume, Renee, that you're right. And you may very well be, but the problem is that as soon as you provide that guidance, then it all kicks off. I mean, Stella, look, if we take this approach and are guided by the science, we've had that sort of phrase used now. We can't use it again, can we? It didn't work well last time, did it?
This is medicine. That's how medicine works. You look at the data.
Right.
I think there are,
of course, it's not always right.
There are some issues where sure we can be guided by even on this issue. Again, I would say that there's. I think we may have some data, but I think definitely more is needed, especially when it comes to trans medicine. But I don't think that this is necessarily. I don't think that necessarily the people who have written to Simon Case, I don't think the thing they were complaining about was specifically the safeguarding issues that you're referring to, Renee. I think they were talking more about an environment where they feel like they cannot speak freely about what they believe in and which side of the argument they fall on. And I do actually agree that it is only fair that you either don't talk about this issue at all at work, or everyone is allowed to air their opinion.
Yes.
And I think maybe that's the answer. Right, let's move on. We've got an element of agreement, so whilst we have that, I'm going to take a... How well... I mean, and again, this is a science thing, because if we follow the science, then we ban smoking. If we follow the science, we ban drinking. If we follow the science, we ban diet drinks. If we follow the science, we ban golden arches, and we ban all sorts of things. I don't want to follow the science. Stop banning stuff. Why is Rishi Sunak considering banning cigarettes for the next generation? By all means, convince people not to do it. I used to smoke. I don't anymore. I can see that it's bad. I should probably never started in the first place. But you ban something. I've had my tea. Harrison, where do we start on this? Do we ban cigarettes for the next generation?
Absolutely not. I am a fellow former smoker. I managed to stop over the last several years. I'm currently using disposable vapes, which is also going to ban.
Oh, they're going to ban those. I mean, apparently they're terrible for you.
What this is, they are nowhere near as bad as cigarette smoke. I mean, even Public Health England estimated that vaping is about 97% safer than smoking several years ago, and Public Health England were the chief nannying organisation of the UK, so it's probably 98.5%.
Stella, do you agree with that? Should we be banning? I mean, where do you stand on ban? Let's start with that. Where do you stand on banning?
I do have an authoritarian streak in me as a Greek person, but also as a Greek person, I find...
And as a former Labour aide. I mean, that's doubly bad, isn't it?
I would say, as a former Labour aide, I would say... With smoking, it is very hard, right? Because it is something cultural for a lot of people. It's something emotional, and it is something that for a lot of people, they feel like it's the one pleasure I have in the day. If you're going to take that from me, what are you going to give me back? Especially when you're talking about we're living at a time
have you been a smoker?
Miserable. I'm Greek, James. What did you not understand from that sentence?
Well, I think this is
Give it to us in the...
This is a
when
really
we're
valid
babies.
point. We have done so well with smoking compared to the rest of Europe. We are miles
I'm not
ahead.
sure you have. No, I'm not. I would definitely not say that. I think the British people have a lot of unhealthy habits. I do think
I'm
the
talking
government
about
needs to
smoking.
act.
Just
yes,
smoking.
yes.
Can I just talk
You
about,
have
because
done.
I was in Greece last week.
Yes, and we smoke inside. You're going to say.
No. I was amazed. First of all, in the airport, you still have those boxes where people could smoke. Amazing. The second thing is, with the availability of duty-free cigarettes, I was almost tempted to get it. They're so
They're
cheap.
so cheap, yeah.
And then the next thing was how many people were smoking on the beach and in the bars and things.
Yeah.
And I have to say, as a former smoker, a little whiff. You've got sunshine.
You were jealous.
Oh, you've got
Jealous of
you've
our
got-
lifestyle.
You've got sunshine. You've got a little bit of sun cream, and in the sort of whiff in the air. And you've got a little bit of like sea air coming in, and the waves coming in, and the beach is there, and everything else. And then pop of a cork, and sometimes you think, oh. Anyway, but no, I did. There was no smoking. Didn't touch it, and I moved on. But
Well,
I
you
think
used your free will.
I did use my free will.
What an insane idea.
Yeah.
But
The
the
government
thing
doesn't
is-
acknowledge that exists.
And the thing is, the reason why it's so difficult for people to give up, it's because it is culturally ingrained, and especially from a young age, and because there is an economic incentive for the tobacco companies to continue to in whatever way they can spike up the demand. This is going to continue unless we actually take action to restrict it and also give something back.
Tell me,
I mean,
tell me, how well has banning things like alcohol done in the past?
Yes, no, you're quite right. I do not agree that banning things is the best solution. I do not agree. I do think I think we need to find other solutions, and I think it should start with making life more pleasant for young people. If young people are more fulfilled in their lives, then they would not have the need to constantly fuel some kind of addiction.
But why are young people so miserable?
Well, they're very...
When I was growing up, young people were all happy and everything had a fantastic... Oh, it's the mobile phones. Dr. Rennie, the voice of common sense speaks
Very
again.
good article in The Spectator that we were talking about, actually.
I love The
Why
Spectator.
are teenagers so unhappy? And their unhappiness has a linear link to how much time they spend on social media.
I agree. When I was growing up in Greece, I used to be allowed to go out and play from a very young age, and I used to love it. And kids these days, you walk around council estates and you see everywhere all of these signs saying no ball games allowed. And I'm like, okay, great, no ball games allowed. What do you want kids to do then?
Mr.
They're going to go
Fun's
smoke.
I think-
Harrison, banning things, why are kids so miserable?
Well, I mean, I think the common theme here is stop banning stuff. You know, let people play ball, let people smoke, let people vape, just let people live their lives as they so choose. You know, bear the
But
cost and
children,
responsibility. If you don't
let
like
people,
it, if you
but
don't like it,
children
don't
need
do it.
guidance.
Well, of course I don't think you should be
People,
able...
yes.
Of course I
Children,
think you
no.
should be able to sell cigarettes to children. But this is not what Rishi Sunak's
But then
proposing.
what
He's
about-
proposing to ban cigarette smoking. Oh, reportedly.
I think Rishi Sunak
to ban it for anybody out
I
who was
think
born
Rishi
after the
Sunak
1st
is
of
doing
January
that just
2009.
because he's realising that his polling is going down and he needs, as you said, to throw some red meat to the media so that he
Indeed.
has some nice
Listen, I
I
front
can't
covers.
imagine this
I
is
think he's
gonna
run out of red
yeah,
meat.
I can't imagine this is going to win him any poll points.
No,
really.
I think he thinks that makes him sound tough. I think that's what it is.
But also, when I was growing up, I mean, smoking behind bike sheds was a thing. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
And the shopkeeper who used to sell singles to every school child. that
But
came
you were
in and
also,
asked.
James, at the time, for a very long time. You have to remember that smoking was not seen as unhealthy as we know
Yes,
it to be
doctors
now.
used to do it in
Very
the
true.
charging rooms.
So,
talking of red meat, here's one. Rishi Sunak has been told by Boris Johnson and David Cameron, I don't know who's red meat there, but anyway, I don't think it's dead meat, anyway, to drop plans to scale back HS2 amid warnings that a mutilated line would be insanity. I tend to agree with both Boris and David on this, or Mr. Johnson and Mr. Cameron, that we've got HS2, they've spent a lot of money on it so far. I kind of agree with infrastructure projects. I wish they would do more elsewhere with our infrastructure, but cutting it off at Birmingham and not going up to Manchester is insane.
Insane. It was supposed to go all the way to Paris at some point.
To Paris?
Now, yes.
Oh my
that
God.
was a dream. And now,
Hold that thought. We find out whether HS2 should go to Paris. That's next here on Talk. 8:43 is the time. It's Saturday breakfast with me, James Max, and Dr. Rennie Honekamp. We're here until 10 o'clock this morning. Been going through the papers, having a bit of a head-to-head with Stella Chadikadu and also Harrison Griffiths. They're both here, and we've been having a little bit of a row about HS2. Stella, you dropped a bombshell by saying that HS2 was supposed to go to Paris. How was that going to happen?
That was just a dream that I read somewhere that it wasn't that HS2 would be going to Paris, but it was that Birmingham would be and Manchester would be connected to Paris through the HS2.
Oh.
I imagine because the HS2 would go to Houston, and then from there you could get the direct line to Paris.
And that's where your dream fell apart.
Not my dream, let me tell you, not my dream. It was David Cameron's and Boris Johnson's dream at some point. So
are you an HS2 fan or not?
An HS2 fan. Am I a fan of a country being well connected? Yes, I think it's incredibly important for the economy. I think people want to be able to travel to London with ease.
Yes.
And
okay.
Yeah.
Harrison, are you a HS2 fan?
Not particularly. I think the gains at this point would be fairly marginal given the cost and the amount of time it's taken. But I'm willing to be sold on HS2 as a project. But the problems here is, why has this been blocked? Why has this taken such a long time? And it's symptomatic of the broader malaise we have in this country.
Oh.
I know. Keeping it sunny on Saturday
Renee,
morning.
are you an HS2 fan?
No, I think it should all be scrapped now and spend the money elsewhere where we really, really need it, because what we're going to get is a ridiculous half line from Birmingham to Old Oak Common.
No, but
we don't need this.
Now, I agree with you on that it should do what it was originally sent to do, but everybody complained about what's now called the Elizabeth line until it opened, and then as soon as it opened, they realised how amazing it was. It happened with HS1, it happened with the Channel Tunnel, it happened with the M25. We are appalling in this country at allowing people to get in the way of infrastructure developments, because we say, oh, there's a forest here, there's a small light.
Yes, but the Elizabeth line the Elizabeth line did actually say what it was going to do at the start and did it. HS2 now is nothing like the original plan. It's not going to connect the north. It's not going to cross from Liverpool to Manchester.
But that's because they keep cutting it back as opposed to... So, do I agree with the government cutting it back? No, it should do what it originally set out to do, get on with it, and stop allowing and spending more... Because every time we have a discussion about it, you might as well add a few billion to the cost, because we delayed it.
Or did we delay it? Or is it so corrupt that the way it's actually being run is so corrupt that the costs are so ridiculously high?
No, you speak to Steve Norris, and Steve Norris will tell you that every single government department, every time they've done a big infrastructure project, like, for example, the Jubilee line, he'll tell you that the amount of money that government was told it was going to be, they knew how much it was going to cost. The public were told another number because they never would have said yes otherwise. And that happens every single time. The government knew right at the beginning how much this was going to cost. So did Labour, so did everybody. They decided they wanted it, and so they just pushed ahead, and so they should, because infrastructure costs a lot of money.
But not infrastructure from outside of London to Birmingham. We do not need to get to Birmingham from the outskirts of London in an extra 10 minutes.
So you're saying, okay, so would you support it if it went from Euston and went up to Manchester?
And across to Liverpool.
And across to Liverpool, then you would support it.
Yes.
Then let's do it. There we go.
But I think the trouble with this is assuming that this is about, governments making, that we've just decided to cut it down. This was always going to happen. This is what happens when the state takes the lead in massive infrastructure projects in the UK. They will always be caving into political pressures from important constituencies like NIMBYs and like environmentalists who want HS2 blocked. This was always going to happen.
How many times have we discussed, for example, Heathrow? We have fantastic worldwide, and then we allow people to get in the way of development, build bigger runways, sort it out. Let's go on holiday.
Would you say that?
That's why they wanted the HS2 to begin with, because they wouldn't build the third runway, right? And that was David Cameron's and Boris Johnson's idea.
So they should do.
That was their will, and I think it's a bit rich of them now, instead of actually pressuring the Prime Minister of their own party to deliver what he promised to the voters. I think people are going to be so frustrated at one more infrastructure problem that's never been delivered. And you're quite right, James. It is a thing in the UK in particular that we just cannot bring ourselves to deliver a long-term big infrastructure
I was really impressed. So I keep, if you read what the press said about Greece and the economy and this and that, you'd think that it's crumbling. You go to Greece, the infrastructure, the rails, and indeed the roads, incredible.
The trains are much better, yeah.
Yeah, much better. And it's just like, when are we going to realise that it's not just about HS2? We need to have proper trains up and down the country, proper roads up and down the country, and you don't have to do it with a socialist state to deliver it.
I can recommend the work of Sam Dimitri at Britain Remade on why our infrastructure is so appallingly bad at the moment. In certain European cities, you've got enormous tram developments that have taken place at multiple stages of upgrade since Leeds last got
I love a tram.
upgrade. Yeah, trams are great. But it's just so difficult to build. Energy as well. Sizewell C has had to undergo more than 44,000 pages of green regulatory bureaucracy. 44,000 pages.
It is a problem of communication as well. You cannot just blame the voters or the local constituents for not wanting to allow projects to go through their constitutions.
Blame the politicians for being useless.
You do actually need to look at the government and say, what communication have you done to convince the voters to take people with you on this project, to explain the actual long-term value of this project and why you should want it.
But it's not going to happen. What the government have done is created an incentive structure where people, in local areas can block important developments just by virtue of objecting. I don't think you're ever going to convince these people. I think there just needs to be a concerted conversation in this country to say that it is not right that people are allowed to block developments going on not on their property. If it's not yours, you don't get a say.
Oh, wow.
It's a radical approach, but I think it's the right one.
Sorry, do you want to go and live in communist China?
Where they have strong private property rights?
Well, they don't.
I mean, that's exactly. And I'm saying I believe in strong private property rights. If it's in your garden, if it affects your property, then fine. But if it doesn't,
your property.
Yeah, like an externality. So say if people are, pumping waste onto your property, that's fine. But merely being near something you don't like is not, in my view, a legitimate excuse.
So it's not okay to have HS2 running through your garden, but it is okay to have it running
not running through your garden. I don't think people should have their property seized off them. I don't agree with that.
But it is okay to have it at the end of their garden, off their property.
Absolutely. I have a very close friend. I used to live in a village called Honeybourne in Worcestershire, where the train goes all the way through. A very close friend of mine used to live right next to it. It was fine.
It's not fine. Here's the thing. It's only fine if our government accepts proper compensation must be paid, and that's where we have a problem.
To people who suffer a noise externality, I agree, but that is not what most of this situation is about.
But if we dealt with compensation properly, a lot of these problems will go away.
But again, I mean, you're talking about adding money to the bill. How long and to what extent are you entitled to compensation, and to what extent are you allowed to object and block before the government finally says, here is the compensation, take it or leave it?
I'm not sure we're going to solve this problem now. So let's just have a final vote. Renee, from your perspective, HS2, you're a no?
As it currently stands, scrap it.
Oh, Stella?
Deliver what you promised.
OK. Harrison?
Probably scrap it, but please just build something.
We're all really rather depressed here. I don't know, I feel as if we need donuts or something in the studio to cheer us up. Anyway, Stella Chadwick-Cadu and Harrison Griffiths, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Stella, of course, former Labour aide, and Harrison, political commentator and communications expert at the IEA. That was today's Head to Head.
Head to Head.